There's a moment in life when everything you've worked for just collapses. For me, it happened in a single week. My business, the one I built with my bare hands, was gone. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, but it wasn't friends or family calling. It was debt collectors. My kitchen table was covered in final notices. My fridge was empty, and the house that once felt warm suddenly felt like a prison. And then came the hardest moment of all, swallowing my pride. I told myself, family is supposed to be there for you when you fall. So I went to the one person I thought I could trust, my father, Bernard. I still remember the way he looked at me that day. Not with sympathy, not even disappointment, but with indifference. "I can't help you," he said. Just like that. No questions, no second thought. I walked away that night with nothing but the clothes on my back and a fire in my chest. That was the night everything changed. Because here's the thing. You could take away my money, my house, my business, but you cannot take away my will to fight. So I sold what little I had left, rented a small workshop, and got to work. Day and night. No handouts. No shortcuts. Months later, when Bernard's own life began to crumble and he came to me for help, I was no longer the man who had begged at his door. And the lesson I gave him that day, he would never forget it. My name is David, and if you had met me just a few years ago, you would have seen a man with everything under control, or at least that's what I wanted the world to believe. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood where nothing came easy. The houses were close together, the streets were loud, and money was always short. My parents did their best, but I learned early that if I wanted something, I'd have to earn it myself. That lesson became the foundation of my entire life. By the time I was in my 20s, I was already working 2 jobs, saving every penny I could. I wasn't the smartest man in the room, but I was relentless. I built my first business from scratch, just me, a secondhand laptop, and a rented corner space in a small strip mall. Every win, no matter how small, felt like a personal victory. As the years went on, I grew my little venture into something respectable. I hired employees. I moved into a bigger office. For the first time in my life, I felt proud, not just of what I'd built, but of the man I was becoming. I believed in hard work, in loyalty, in showing up even when it hurt. My hands were calloused, my back ached, but I wore those aches like a badge of honor. I did all of it for my family, for the wife I loved, for the kids I wanted to give a better life than I had. I thought I was laying down a legacy, something that would outlast me. My relationship with my father, Bernard, had always been complicated. He was a man of few words, stoic and proud. Growing up, I wanted nothing more than to make him proud of me. I chased his approval like a child chases sunlight through the trees. Sometimes I thought I had it, when he would nod quietly at something I had done, or when he would shake my hand a little longer than usual. Other times, I felt invisible, as if no accomplishment of mine was ever enough. Still, I kept trying. It was his work ethic that inspired me. Bernard had taught me to keep my head down and get things done, no matter how tired you were, no matter how unfair life felt. That was the world I knew, the world where men didn't complain, they just worked harder. Our home was modest, but filled with meaning. There were framed photos on the walls, my children's first birthdays, our family road trips, my wife smiling with flour on her hands as she baked bread in the kitchen. The house smelled like coffee in the morning and late-night paperwork at the dining table. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours, and it was filled with love. I was a creature of routine. Up at dawn, quick coffee, straight to the shop. I liked to walk through the workroom before the employees arrived, touching the tools, checking the orders, making sure everything was in place. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing a place you had built with your own sweat. But beneath all that stability, there was always a quiet fear. The fear that everything I had built could disappear overnight. The fear that one wrong decision, one unlucky turn, could bring it all crashing down. I kept that fear buried, smiled through it, and worked twice as hard to make sure it never became reality. I was the man everyone came to when they needed advice, money, or just someone to listen. Friends, neighbors, even distant relatives, they all knew they could count on me. And I was happy to be that person. Helping others made me feel useful, made me feel like my struggles meant something. That's why what happened next cut so deep. Because when it was finally my turn to need someone, when I was the one standing at the edge, looking for a hand to hold. I believed, without question, that my father would be there for me. But before we get to that moment, you have to understand where my heart was. I spent the next few days in survival mode. I sold what I could, my old tools, a piece of furniture here and there, anything that could buy me a little more time. Every sale felt like another piece of me being chipped away. At night, I'd sit in the workshop, now nearly empty, with just one workbench left. I'd run my fingers over the rough wood, remembering the day I built it with my own hands. It was the first thing I ever made when I started the business. And now it was all I had left. I wanted to hate Bernard. I wanted to let that anger consume me. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, calm, unshaken, as he told me no. That hurt worse than any creditor's call. For a while, I let myself wallow. I barely ate. I barely spoke. My wife tried to reach me, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She was trying to be strong, but she was terrified too. And then one night, I hit bottom. I was sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at a single overdue bill, when I felt something snap inside me. My hand started to shake, not from fear, but from anger. I was done feeling sorry for myself, done waiting for someone to save me. If my father couldn't believe in me, then I would believe in myself. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down every skill I had, every contact I could still call, every idea that had been sitting in the back of my mind for years. The page filled quickly, and as I wrote, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose. The next morning, I rented a tiny, dusty workshop on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 4 walls, a leaky roof, and a single flickering light bulb, but it was mine. I dragged my last remaining tools inside and got to work. At first, it was humiliating. I went from being the owner of a respected business to taking on small repair jobs, patching together broken furniture, fixing squeaky doors for neighbors. But every job I did, no matter how small, gave me a little more money, a little more confidence. I worked until my hands were raw, until my back ached so badly I had to sleep on the floor because the bed was too soft. But I didn't stop. Every dollar I earned, I reinvested. Every mistake I made, I learned from. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving to myself, and to Bernard, that I wasn't finished. But even as things slowly began to turn around, the emotional weight didn't lift. I still felt the sting of rejection, the anger that my father could sit in his comfortable home while I clawed my way back from nothing. And in those quiet moments, alone in that dusty workshop, I made a silent promise. I would rise again, and when I did, Bernard would see me, not as the desperate man who had come to him begging, but as someone who had rebuilt himself from the ground up. The first few weeks in that tiny workshop were brutal. The roof leaked when it rained, the single bulb flickered constantly, and the cold at night crept into my bones. But oddly enough, it became my sanctuary, a place where every hour I spent was an hour moving forward. I started taking whatever work came my way. A neighbor needed a broken chair repaired. I said yes. Someone down the street wanted a custom shelf built. I said yes. People pay me in cash, sometimes in food, sometimes with just a handshake and a promise. At first, it felt like scraps, but slowly, the scraps became something solid. Every evening, I came home covered in dust and sweat, but I held my head a little higher. My wife noticed. She'd meet me at the door with a tired smile, and sometimes we'd sit at the kitchen table together late at night, just talking, dreaming again. The first time I made enough to pay off a single overdue bill, I felt a surge of pride I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't much, but it was mine, earned through my own hands without anyone's pity. As the months passed, word spread about my work. Soon, I wasn't just fixing chairs. I was building furniture, taking orders from small businesses, even creating custom pieces for clients outside town. I reinvested everything into better tools, sturdier tables, and little by little, my workshop started to feel less like a refuge and more like a business again. But while my world was slowly being rebuilt, Bernard's world was starting to crack. I'd hear whispers from relatives that one of his investments had tanked, that he'd lost money in a deal he thought was guaranteed. I stayed quiet, never reaching out. Then came the day I saw him in town. I was loading a finished table into a customer's truck when Bernard walked past. He looked different. tired. His clothes were neat, but there was a heaviness in the way he moved, as though the weight of his own pride was finally catching up to him. He nodded at me, just a small acknowledgement, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Not yet. Inside, though, something shifted. For months, I had been driven by anger, by the need to prove him wrong. But now, seeing him like that, I felt something more complicated, not just anger, but a strange mix of pity and defiance. I worked harder than ever after that. Every contract I won, every satisfied customer, every dollar I earned, it felt like another brick in the wall I was building between who I used to be and who I was becoming. But the emotional weight was still there. Some nights, I'd sit in the dark workshop long after the tools were put away, staring at my hands. I thought about that day at Bernard's table, the quiet refusal, the look on his face. I told myself I would never put anyone in that position, never make someone feel as small as I'd felt. And then, almost a year after I'd started over, it happened. I signed my biggest contract yet, a job that would take months, but would finally put me ahead, not just surviving, but thriving. I stood in the empty workshop that night and laughed, the sound echoing off the walls. I had done it. I had rebuilt my life. But life has a way of bringing old wounds back to the surface. 2 weeks later, Bernard showed up at my workshop. He didn't call first. He just walked in, looking older than I had ever seen him. His shoulders were slumped, and for the first time in my life, he looked unsure of himself. "David," he said quietly, "I need your help." My heart pounded. This was the moment I had imagined 100 times in my head, the moment when the man who had turned me away would finally come to me. Part of me wanted to turn him out, to let him feel what I had felt that day. But another part of me, the part that had spent months fighting and growing, felt calm. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about respect, mine and his. I wiped my hands on my work apron and looked him in the eye. "Sit down," I said. "We need to talk." Bernard sat across from me at the same old workbench where I had spent countless nights sanding wood until my fingers bled. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence between us thick and heavy. It felt surreal, almost poetic. The last time I had sat across from him asking for help, I was the one broken, desperate. Now, the roles were reversed. He cleared his throat, his voice lower than I remembered. "I've made some bad choices," he admitted. "Investments I thought were safe weren't. The market turned, and I wasn't prepared." I stayed quiet, letting him talk. "I'm in trouble, David," he said finally. "I need money. A lot of it. The bank is threatening to take the house." I leaned back, crossing my arms, letting his words hang in the air. For months, I had imagined this moment, dreamed about it even. I thought it would feel like victory, but it didn't. It felt complicated. I remembered every sleepless night, every empty plate, every moment of fear after he turned me away. I remembered standing outside his house, soaked in the rain, feeling like the world had abandoned me. Part of me wanted to make him feel that same pain, to let him walk out of here with nothing. But as I looked at him, really looked at him, I saw more than just the man who had rejected me. I saw my father, the man who had raised me, taught me how to work hard, how to keep going even when it hurt. "Do you remember the day I came to you?" I asked quietly. He looked away. "Yes." "Do you remember what you said?" He nodded slowly, shame flickering across his face. "I do. You told me you couldn't help, that you had your own life." "I was wrong," he said after a long pause. "I thought I was teaching you to stand on your own. I thought maybe it would make you stronger." I almost laughed at that, the bitter kind of laugh that tastes like salt and iron. "You didn't make me stronger, Bernard. Life did." I did. He didn't argue. The workshop was silent except for the faint hum of the light overhead. "This isn't just about money," I said finally. "This is about respect, about trust, about family. When I came to you, I wasn't asking for a handout. I was asking for a hand up. And you let me fall." Bernard's eyes glistened, though he didn't cry. "I see that now," he said softly. "And I'm sorry." Those 3 words hit harder than I expected. I had waited so long to hear them that I didn't know what to do with them now that they were here. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the man who had been both my hero and my greatest source of pain. Then I stood up and walked to the small safe in the corner of the workshop. Inside was the contract I had just signed, the biggest deal of my new business, the proof of everything I had rebuilt. I laid on the workbench in front of him. "Do you see this?" I asked. He nodded. "This is what I built after you told me no. This is what I clawed my way back to, without anyone's help. You thought you were teaching me a lesson that day. Maybe you were, but it wasn't the lesson you intended." He looked up at me, waiting. "The lesson I learned," I said, my voice steady, "is that no one is coming to save you. If you want to survive, you save yourself. And now that I have, I'm not going to throw it all away just because you didn't believe in me when it mattered most." His face fell slightly, but he didn't look angry, just humbled. "So that's it?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then shook my head. "No, I'm not going to turn my back on you the way you turned your back on me. But I'm not just going to hand you money either. If I help you, there will be conditions. You will pay me back, every penny, and you will be involved in the business that earns it. No more hiding behind pride. You work beside me until this debt is cleared." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly he nodded. "Fair," he said. That was the moment everything shifted. The anger I had carried for so long, the bitterness, the resentment, it didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip on me. I felt lighter somehow, because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity and offering him a chance to reclaim his. The next morning, Bernard showed up at the workshop. He was dressed simply, not like the man who used to walk around in pressed shirts and polished shoes. His sleeves were rolled up, and he carried a quiet determination in his face that I hadn't seen before. "Where do we start?" he asked. I handed him a broom. He didn't argue, just started sweeping the floor. Watching Bernard, my father, clean my workshop was one of the strangest moments of my life. For years, I had seen him as untouchable, a man above menial labor. Now here he was, doing the kind of work he would have once dismissed as beneath him. It wasn't easy at first. The air between us was tense. We spoke little, keeping our focus on the tasks at hand. I gave him small jobs, sanding wood, carrying lumber, and he did them without complaint, though I could see the effort it cost him. His hands, once smooth from years of office work, blistered quickly. But slowly, as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift. We started talking, not about money, not about the past, but about the work itself. I explained my process, how I had rebuilt my business piece by piece. He asked questions, listened carefully. It was as if we were building something more than furniture. We were rebuilding a bridge between us, one conversation at a time. Still, there were moments when the tension boiled over. One afternoon, a shipment came in late, and I snapped at him without thinking. "If you'd organized the order like I asked, this wouldn't have happened." He froze, hurt flashing across his face, and for a moment I saw the same expression I must have worn the day he turned me away. I took a breath, forcing myself to calm down. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "This isn't easy for me either." He nodded, and we kept working. It wasn't just Bernard who was changing. I was changing too. I began to see him not just as the man who had failed me, but as a man who was failing himself, someone who had carried his pride so long that he didn't know how to set it down until now. One night, as we closed up the workshop, I found him sitting on the workbench, staring at the tools. "You know," he said quietly, "when you came to me that day, I wasn't just thinking about the money. I was thinking about all the times I'd bailed people out before. Friends, relatives, they took my help and never learned to stand on their own. I didn't want that for you." I leaned against the doorway. "But you didn't trust me enough to believe I'd be different." He nodded slowly. "No, and that's my regret." For the first time, I felt the anger in my chest start to fade, not disappear, but soften. The next morning, I gave him a bigger job, a custom order for one of my best clients. He worked carefully, asking for guidance when he needed it. When we delivered the finished piece together, the client was thrilled. On the drive back, Bernard actually smiled. "Feels good to make something with your hands," he said. I didn't say anything, but inside, something shifted again. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like we were on opposite sides of a battle. But just as things were beginning to feel steady, a new challenge arrived, one that would test everything we had rebuilt so far. I received a call from the bank that afternoon. A larger competitor had made an offer to buy out my workshop space, and if I didn't match the offer, I'd lose the lease. It was everything I'd worked for, suddenly hanging by a thread. Bernard saw the look on my face as I hung up. "What is it?" he asked. I told him. For a moment, we just stood there in silence, the weight of it pressing down on us. And then, to my surprise, he put a hand on my shoulder. "Then we fight for it," he said. It was the first time I felt like we were truly on the same team. The next few days were a blur. Every hour counted. If we didn't come up with enough money to secure the lease, everything I had built would be gone again. I threw myself into work with a kind of desperation I hadn't felt since the day I lost my first business. I took on every order I could, stayed up late filling them, and called in every favor I had left. Bernard didn't just watch this time. He worked beside me. It was strange, almost surreal, to see my father doing the grunt work without complaint. He carried lumber, polished furniture, even made deliveries when I couldn't leave the shop. And for the first time, I didn't see him as the man who had turned me away. I saw him as my partner. One night, exhausted, we sat together in the dimly lit workshop. The air smelled of sawdust and varnish. My hands were raw, my shirt clung to me with sweat, but I didn't stop scribbling numbers on a pad. "We're still short," I said, rubbing my temples. Bernard was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and placed an envelope on the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Everything I have left," he said simply. "It isn't much, but it's yours." I stared at the envelope. The man who once refused to give me a single dollar was now offering me the last of what he owned. "You don't have to do this," I said. "Yes," he replied, his voice steady. "I do. I need to know that I can make things right, that I can stand by you now, even if I failed you before." Something inside me cracked open at that moment. The anger I had held for so long finally let go. This wasn't the proud, untouchable man I had known my whole life. This was someone who was finally choosing humility over pride. We pushed through the final days together, working like men possessed. When the deadline came, we had just enough, barely, to match the offer and secure the lease. When the contract was signed, I sat down hard on the nearest chair, a laugh escaping my chest. "It's ours," I said, almost in disbelief. Bernard exhaled, his shoulders slumping as though he had been holding his breath for weeks. Then, to my surprise, he smiled. "You did it," he said quietly. "No," I corrected him. "We did it. It wasn't just the shop we had saved. It was something bigger, something I thought was lost forever." That night, we closed up the workshop and stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars were sharp and bright overhead. For a long moment, we just stood there side by side. "You know," Bernard said after a while, "I didn't think I'd ever get the chance to fix what I broke between us. Thank you for letting me try." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see the man who had failed me. I saw my father. "You earned this chance," I said, "just like I earned mine." For the first time, there was no tension between us, no resentment, just quiet respect. The fight for the lease hadn't just saved my business. It had saved something far more important. The morning after we secured the lease, I arrived at the workshop early. The air was crisp, the sunrise spilling gold through the dusty windows, bathing the room in a soft glow. I stood in the middle of the shop, looking around at the workbenches, the tools, the finished projects waiting to be delivered. For the first time in what felt like years, I felt completely at peace. Bernard arrived a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one, and we stood there quietly, drinking, listening to the sound of the city waking up. "This place," he said softly, "it's more than just a workshop." I nodded. "It's where I lost everything, and where I found myself again." He smiled faintly, setting his cup down. I didn't understand that before. I thought money was the answer. I thought protecting my resources meant protecting myself. But I see now, I wasn't protecting anything. I was just hiding. Hearing him say that was more healing than I expected. For so long, I had carried the weight of that rejection like a scar, using it as fuel to push myself forward. Now, hearing him take responsibility, it felt like that scar was finally beginning to fade. "You know," I said after a pause, "when you told me no, I thought I'd never forgive you. I thought I'd spend my whole life proving you wrong. But somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't just fighting you, I was fighting myself. My own fear, my own pride." He looked at me, his expression thoughtful. And did you win? I smiled. I think so. We spent the rest of the morning working side by side, but the energy was different now. Lighter, warmer. There was no resentment in the air, no unspoken anger. Just two men building something together, step by step. When lunchtime came, Bernard wiped his hands and turned to me. I'll keep working with you as long as you'll have me. Not because I owe you, but because I want to. I nodded. Good. Because this is just the beginning. That was the day I stopped thinking of Bernard as just my father and started thinking of him as my partner. The months that followed were some of the most fulfilling of my life. The business grew faster than I ever expected. New clients came in, old ones returned, and for the first time, I had a waiting list of orders. But more important than the money, more important than the success, was what had changed between Bernard and me. We started having dinner together once a week, something we hadn't done in years. We talked about everything, the business, my kids, even his regrets about the past. There were moments when the old tension threatened to creep back in, but we faced them together, openly, honestly. And every time I looked at him, I felt that quiet sense of pride that comes from not just surviving hardship, but growing because of it. One evening, as we were closing up shop, Bernard stopped me at the door. I need to tell you something, he said. I waited. You were right, he said simply. Success isn't something you give, it's something you earn. And you earned this, David. All of it. I felt a lump in my throat. Those were the words I had been waiting to hear my whole life. Thank you, I said, my voice quiet but steady. Driving home that night, I realized something important. The man who had once turned me away had given me more than money ever could. He had given me the push I needed to discover what I was capable of. And maybe that was the lesson all along, that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who push us to grow the strongest. When I got home, I found my kids sitting at the table, working on their school projects. I looked at them and smiled. One day I said, I'll tell you the story of how I lost everything and how I got it back. And when I do, I want you to remember this. The world can take away everything you have, but it can never take away who you are. That's something only you can give up. That's what I want you to take from my story, too. Life will knock you down. People you love will disappoint you. But those moments don't have to define you. They can refine you. I didn't just rebuild a business. I rebuilt myself. And in doing so, I rebuilt my family. If you've made it this far, take a moment to really sit with this story. We all face moments when life knocks us flat. When we lose everything we've worked for, when the people we trust turn their backs on us, when we feel like we're standing completely alone. Those moments can break you, or they can forge you into something stronger. David's story isn't just about business or money. It's about grit. It's about finding the strength to get back up when no one is coming to rescue you. And maybe most importantly, it's about learning to turn pain into purpose, and even opening the door to forgiveness when the time is right. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you needed help and someone you love let you down? How did you respond? Did you cut them off? Or did you find a way to rebuild that relationship? Share your story in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear it. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to find the strength to keep going. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button. It tells YouTube that this kind of content matters, and it helps more people find stories that inspire hope and courage. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because we have more stories like this one coming soon. Stories about redemption, resilience, and the power of family. If David's journey taught us anything, it's this. You are stronger than your circumstances, and no one, not even the people who fail you, can take that strength away.